When we were young, we read more often because we had to. It was the only way for us to get knowledge and to be enlightened. Read to your heart's delight and be enlightened. Let's just read. It's a podcast by Andy's Personal Development. Stay tuned for more reading and enlightenment. Hey, welcome. This is Andy of Andy's Personal Development, and we are live in the studio of Let's Just Read. Our guest, Mary Frances Fisher. For the purpose of this interview or episode or conversation, we will address her as Mary Frances. So let me tell you a bit about our guest, as we know she's going to say a whole lot more about herself. She is known as the author of Growing Up O'Malley. And Growing Up O'Malley is a poignant story of an Irish immigrant couple who raised 7 boisterous children in the early 1900s. She's also written a historical murder mystery, Paradox Forged in Blood, and it is set in Cleveland, Ohio, during the late 1930s. So let's welcome Mary Frances Fisher. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. And yourself?
I'm doing good, and thank you for asking. And it's a pleasure to have you with us. And we look forward for this time that we'll spend together speaking about your writing, your message, and your story. So, Mary Frances, I want to go back some years. I don't know how far back you can remember, but usually all of us have a story with regards to our foundation, where it all started for us. As far back as you can recall, how did your story start, and what was it like for you growing up as a young lady?
My story began when I was born in 1953, the youngest of 4 children to middle-class parents.
Yeah.
I became a nurse and a registered nurse.
Right.
And I worked at the Cleveland Clinic on their VIP ward, which I thought that was a new kind of disease. Turns out it meant what it sounded like, very important people.
Okay.
So we had celebrities, we had kings and queens, actors from all over the world. And it was fascinating. But I transitioned from that into a legal nurse consultant because working at the clinic, they had me on midnight shifts.
Okay.
And I was in my 20s, and all my friends were going out, and I was working at night. So it was not a good fit. For 30 years working with attorneys as a consultant, I absolutely burned myself out from long hours and stress. So then I decided to try my hand at writing. That's where we are now.
Ah, great. And how did you feel about the writing? Was it one-time inspiration, or was it something that you had been thinking about for a little while, and then you finally decided, you know what, let me try my hand, this is the time? How did it actually happen for you?
When I was young, teachers always told me I was a very good writer. But I never took it seriously and didn't think I could make enough money or make a living as a writer.
Okay.
When my mother died in 2008, I spiraled with grief. My weight went down to 95 pounds.
Wow.
I was close to being collapsing pretty much. And I knew that I had to turn that into something positive. So I decided to write a book where I cast my mother as the heroine. And that's my first book, Paradox Forged in Blood.
Okay. Tell us a bit about that. Tell us a bit about the storyline, the research, the inspiration, and what do you want people to get out of that particular publication?
Well, the first book involves a murder of a very influential person. In Cleveland, Ohio, there was an area called Millionaires Row.
Right.
As it sounds like it, that's where all the millionaires lived.
Uh-huh.
And it occurred like a December 24th, 1939, excuse me, where a millionaire is murdered. And my mother played the nanny to their children.
Okay.
She was home at the time, and she heard a commotion, and she saw certain things, but she couldn't tell anyone. And you have to read the book to understand why. But she felt grief throughout her life because she thought she could have and should have done more to help solve the mystery.
Okay.
As things progress, she marries the detective who investigates the crime, and it goes on from there. But it has, all my books contain history. I absolutely love history. The one subject I did great in geography, I got a D in that, so we're not going there.
Fair enough.
History, I truly love, but I don't present history like I'm schooling anyone. I present it in, you've seen these shows where they have movies inspired or based on true events.
Yes.
And then afterwards, they follow up with beyond the headlines. Well, that's the type of history that I present.
All right.
That people wouldn't normally know. And I kind of draw them into the story by that.
Oh, so if I were to put a label to it, Mary Frances, I would say that you sort of put the mystery into the history.
Oh, very well done. Yes.
I'm looking at the information. Thank you. And it says that it's 4 decades after the murder of socialite Louis Sheridan, and the cold case is resurrected with receipt of new evidence that transport detectives back to Nazi Germany.
Yes.
And the only living witness is your mom, Ellen O'Malley.
Correct.
Must confront a haunting secret and her complicit actions. How was it like getting that information from her? Did you actually feel some of the things that she went through and experienced?
Most of the things that she experienced and the lessons that I learned from her contained in the book, because I wrote the book 2 years after she died.
Right.
But her essence is definitely in the book. Her sense of humor.
Wow.
Her love of family. Those are driving forces in the book.
Great.
Along with solving a mystery too.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So let's look at some of your other writings. Let's look at Growing Up O'Malley.
Okay.
What inspired that particular publication? And we'll get to the others after.
That's okay. Actually, that book is 13 years in the making. When I wrote my first book, which was Paradox Forged in Blood, the historical murder mystery.
Yeah.
Something was off about it, but it took me a year to write. And I thought, well, this writing business is pretty easy. Something didn't feel right. So I asked my son to take a look at a couple of chapters. And he pointed something that was so obvious, but I didn't see it. He said, "Mom, are you writing a murder mystery or an homage to the O'Malleys?" And that took me back. I thought, well, because I was writing both in one book.
Yeah.
So I had to separate the two books. And I decided to write the murder mystery first. I thought that would have more appeal to people who don't know me. And then the second book would be Growing Up O'Malley.
Yeah.
So I finished the first book in 2016. And then I underwent multiple spinal surgeries.
Oh my.
Heavy recoveries. And so that dragged out completing the second book. And there were times when I thought this book is never going to be done, but it did get done. And it was actually just published on October the 2nd.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for sharing, Mary Fisher.
Thank
Mary
you.
Frances. How did you get that strength to go through that period of your life where you had to do the surgeries and still bounce back? Because it shows some level of resilience. What was that experience emotionally like for you?
Well, I had a guardian angel
Ah,
looking out for me.
okay.
And she gave me the strength and the stamina. And there were times when you're writing a mystery, there are certain plot elements you want in the book, but not so much so that it gives away who did it. You want to keep, obviously, some mystery about it.
Yeah, yeah.
And whenever I ran into a problem, I would just put the book down, take a break for a couple days, and then it's like this little voice inside. Hi, Mom. She would give me some ideas of how to proceed and how to end my conundrum of building a mystery without ever having done that before.
Okay. Wow. Quite interesting.
Thank you.
Quite interesting. So let's look at some of your other publications. And what I find really interesting is that it's associated with terms that we are quite familiar with. For example, Earning My Wings in Touched by an Angel, a collection of divinely inspired stories and poems. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, there are 6 different stories that I wrote for, I think it was Transcendent Publications.
Okay, yes, it was. Yes.
And thank you. And they actually, they were contests. All of them made it into the final publication. And that gave me some strength, because when I was trying to build up the courage to dive into my second book, that was a nice diversion. And it also honed my writing skills as well.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question? I'm sorry.
I think so, but I want to go a little deeper, because I think that what happened is that you receive a couple of awards. Let me just explain in the simplest manner that I possibly can. I'm going to take it from the information. It says a collection of Angelic stories and poems in March 2016, and you were the second place winner for Leap of Faith in the Best of Spiritual Writers Network 2016. And you also had written a screenplay based on Mercy's Legacy, and in 2022 won the Firebird Honorable Recognition for Earning My Wings. So that tells us a lot. How did you feel about placing second and then getting that honorable award?
Oh, I was on cloud 9. It was validation that my writing actually is not too bad.
Right. Great, wonderful.
But one of the Mercy's Legacy, that's probably my favorite of all the short stories. Well, my second favorite. My first favorite is Earning My Wings.
Earning Your Wings, yeah.
Earning My Wings was written after my aunt died. She was an O'Malley, of course. Her name was Margaret O'Malley, and then she married Shay. And after she died, I made her an angel. And she was the tiniest angel in heaven, and all she wanted was to earn her wings. So one day, God blessed her with, she could feel an itching in her back. She didn't know what it was. And it turned out she was growing wings.
Wow.
When she grew those wings, she was literally on cloud 9.
Okay.
But she didn't have very good self-control. She would zoom all over heaven. She would disrupt other clouds where members of family were having reunions and parties. She would zoom in and out of classrooms. So she lost her wings.
Okay. Wow.
So God decided, you need to earn your wings. And she said, what do you mean? I already have them. And then she fell asleep, and she woke up, and she was a little tiny baby. And she wondered what are these things at the end of my arms? They're hands and they're moving. What are they? And then she realized eventually that she was a baby, but she thought, well, maybe these people who call themselves my parents can help me get back to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
But of course they didn't.
Uh-huh.
And as she grows up, she eventually gets back to earning her wings once again. That's probably my favorite story. But the second story, Mercy's Legacy, is quite different.
Yeah.
It takes place in Nazi Germany. I do have, it probably started when I was about 10 years old, an affinity for that time in history.
Yeah.
My neighbor's mother was over. She grew up in Nazi Germany, and she had these numbers on her arms. And so I asked my friend's mother, what are those numbers? And she explained to me what it was. Well, from then on, I was hooked. It's like this great big mystery I never heard about, and I just had to know more. So the story of Mercy's Legacy, kind of in a nutshell, is that the main character, it works at a Mercedes plant, and he's transferred over to America with his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And they're obviously having a difficult time adjusting to American life because Americans don't believe in Nazism.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they found a group called the Bund Organization, which truly existed, and they were Nazis in America.
Okay.
They held parades. In February of 1939, they had 25,000 people who marched down in New York into Times Square. But as the story progresses, they are on vacation and they get into an icy road, and their car goes off the road and ends up in a ditch. And they find out they're okay. They dig the car out, and they hear this crying in the background. Turns out that another car had an accident, and there's a tiny little baby, and they decide to take the baby with them. And they raise the child. And I can't tell you too much more because that would give it away, but the child's origins has an unusual aspect to it.
Okay. I guess that's where the term legacy comes into play.
Yes. They call her Mercedes because that's the company.
Yes.
That her stepfather worked for. So they call her Mercy for short.
Yeah. I get it. Wow. I can tell, Mary Frances, that you're also quite a storyteller. The way you sort of delve back into the history makes it even so much more intriguing. Are there any more works coming out of your knowledge of history that we can look forward to?
Yes, there are two books that I'm working on. First one is called When I Grow Up, a collection of short stories. And the second one is a paranormal mystery called Never Truly Alone.
Wow. And how soon would they be coming out, Mary Frances?
Still working on them. The paranormal mystery it's in draft.
Okay.
I haven't written. I mean, I know what it is. The characters are defined. I haven't written it yet. The first one, it already has 6 stories, the ones that were published. But then there were 5 more short stories that I'm developing to add into it to make it into a complete book.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a bit curious. How is it like for you working with your editors and your publishers? Do you have challenges with them when you come up with your ideas and you start to delve into the history and so on, and you give them the actual stories that you want to put out? Or do they provide some sort of platform and said, okay, you know what, I appreciate the originality, but for it to be popular or to reach the people that you wanted to reach, we have to go this way? How challenging is it for you to work with the editors and the publishers?
I have a fantastic editor. Her name is Lorraine Fico White of Magnifico Manuscripts.
Okay.
And she loves reading about the history, the way that it's presented.
Yes.
But he brought up an extremely important point. She said, you can't just list history, even though it's very fascinating and I enjoyed reading about it. She said, you have to tie it into the characters from their
Mhm,
point of view. How
mhm.
does history affect them and their daily life?
Right.
And that was so obvious. That's the funny part about writing. The things that are so obvious you can often miss. So it's great to have a an editor like that who believes
Yeah.
in me and understands my vision and where I'm going.
Right.
As
And
far as publisher, my first book was put out by Cambridge Publishing,
mhm.
but they are no longer publishing, or maybe they'll publish in the future.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for this book, it's self-published.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah. I like the part that you spoke about your editor. She gets you to a position where you have to kind of look to see the history of the story, yes, but through the eyes of the person who have actually experienced it. And
exactly.
that is so original and so wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Mary Frances.
Of
Do
course.
you get the opportunity to do book talks? And if you do, how is that in a forum? And what kind of responses do you get from people for your stories?
I've gotten great response
Mm-hmm.
from my stories,
Mm-hmm.
because each one is different and unique. As far as my book, my current book was just published October the 2nd.
Right.
It's still kind of new out there,
Okay.
and I'm still getting reviews. I've done maybe 8 or 10 different interviews or podcasts. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm working.
Ah, sounds good, Mary Frances. Sounds good. So tell me, is there anyone who in the literary world has had a further impact or influence on your style, or would you consider what you do to be just very original from you?
Well, I can tell you growing up, Nancy Drew stories,
Ah,
they
yes,
were my go-to.
yes,
And it, whenever I did something good, my mother would buy me another Nancy Drew book, and I think they were $1.49 at the time.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but as the youngest of 4 children to middle class parents, we didn't have a lot of money.
Mm.
So getting a book was a treasure, absolute glory. And matter of fact, I still have all the books downstairs, prominently displayed on a bookshelf.
Okay.
But I grew from there to Pearl S. Buck. She's a Pulitzer Prize winning author about different Asian stories.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated by that as well.
Okay. Wow. And with regards to mentoring, are there any folks that you are mentoring, young persons who are seeking to be a writer, an author, and they like your style and you sort of connect with them and you're working with them based on what they want to do for the future?
Not as of yet, no.
Would you like to mentor someone or some
Oh,
group of
sure.
people? Okay.
And a lot of the interviews that I've given include advice to new authors and
Okay. Okay.
different steps and tricks to
Mm,
use to keep a storyline straight and the plot moving.
yeah. As you speak about that, Mary Frances, I have some sort of concern about the influence of AI. I do a pretty amount of writing myself. I'm on Medium and another couple of platforms. How do you see the influence of AI, artificial intelligence, with regards to the work that writers are doing now? Because it seems to provide a sort of easy way out instead of helping the level of creativity that we are supposed to have. Now, this is just my humble opinion, but how do you see it affecting what we do as writers?
Actually, it's very scary.
Ah,
I I think it has potential for good, but
uh-huh.
I have a feeling it's going to be used in ways that are going to be detrimental. And I think they have to start more strict monitoring, and people have to divulge up front. This
Yeah,
is a lie.
yeah, yeah.
But I'm not worried about the type of writing that I do because it's my own.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't imitate it.
Yeah.
You try, good luck.
Right.
I don't think you'll succeed though.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Mary Frances, you are original. I think probably you are in a very unique niche as far as writing is concerned. And I think,
Thank you.
yes, I think that makes a big difference. What is your message for the world in terms of the opportunity for people to really be enlightened and to get knowledge about having a positive mindset overall, despite what they may go through? What's your message, Mary Frances?
Well, today's society is full of anger, right?
Yeah.
People can post truly vile things anonymously.
Yeah.
They create enmity and no responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's anonymous. That really scares me.
Wow.
But I think that in today's world, we need to focus on history, because history is like a blueprint
Yeah.
of cause and effect. But if people don't know history, they're not afforded that as a way to, let me get this right, as a way to guide them in their lives and how they can better themselves and become productive members of society.
Yeah.
Now, even though we have technological advances, we still have the same problems people had 100 years ago. Take, for example, safety in schools. Back in the Depression, a huge crime was kidnapping children. There was no such thing as stranger danger. So someone would come to school and would supposedly a note from the parents saying, there's a family emergency. We need to take this child, and get them to their parents immediately. Yeah. So the nuns would just send them. Actually, that happened to my uncle, William O'Malley.
Okay.
He was kidnapped.
Wow.
And so that was, luckily he came out of it okay. And I embellished it a little bit to give it a little more adventure. But that was a big thing back then. It was happening so frequently that people were only given maybe 2 lines in a back section of the newspaper. So-and-so has been kidnapped. So-and-so. They weren't headlines. Okay. Because it was so frequent, unless it was someone like Charles Lindbergh. He was kidnapped. That was huge. So if you were wealthy and you had a lot and people knew who you were, then yours was front page, but anyone else's, they were just relegated to the back pages. So they had that problem then. And today, obviously, we have school shootings. So there's still safety in school issues that were present back then, 100 years ago, and they're present again today.
Wow.
So with the advances in technology, the book explains kind of in simple terms how to deal with different emergencies in life and how to draw together as a family and overcome obstacles that are facing you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks for sharing, Mary Frances. I want to share something with you.
Okay.
And I want you to tell me basically what inspired this choice. It's going to come up on the screen now. The book itself, it says, it's an amazing building that I'm seeing there. Yeah. And it's really historical in its presence. And it goes way back to the time period, of course. But what actually brought you and maybe the publishers to the point of saying, okay, you know what? This is it. This is the front that we need. This is the picture that we need so that we can really promote the idea of paradox forged in blood?
That picture was an actual home on Millionaires Row.
Wow.
It was built in the 1870s.
Uh-huh.
And actually, it's what I use in the book.
Mm-hmm.
It's described in the book.
Yeah.
And it was my template.
Okay.
And my, at the time, publisher thought it was a good idea to add the blood splotch, which I thought was just,
yeah.
it's like, oh, I like that.
Kind of gory stuff.
Yes.
But
Yes.
it did actually catch the imagination of people, and I'm glad that you're able to have the success that you had with regards to the publication. In terms of going forward, in terms of the future, do you see any emerging writers on the horizon, people that you admire for their style and their wit and their creativity at this time?
Oh, one of my favorites is Margaret Atwood.
Uh-huh.
She's phenomenal.
Okay.
There's so many writers. I love to read a book where you don't have a clue how they're going to solve something, how they're going to get out of it alive and prosperous.
Wow.
A lot of those books are written by David Baldacci, Dan Brown. I love Dean Koontz. I have a very
I do as well. I'm a fan of him.
One of my favorite books actually was not fiction. It was called 11/22/63. And it involves the Kennedy assassination, but it's probably about a gajillion pages long, but it's outstanding. I really love it. Okay,
great. So we have been in the studio for 38 minutes speaking with Mary Frances Fisher on her many accomplishments as a writer and the interesting perspective of the lens which she sees the history that she so loves to write about. And now we'd like to give her the opportunity to tell you how you can get her publications, maybe her website where you can go and you can purchase her stuff even on Amazon as well. So, Mary Frances, go ahead, tell them.
Okay. My website is very simple, maryfrancesfisher.com. It's pretty original.
Yes.
And the book can be purchased on Amazon and Amazon Kindle. Eventually, it'll be available on Barnes & Noble and Kobe. I'm not sure if that's Kobe or Kobe. How to pronounce that, but that's another outlet.
Okay.
So that will eventually be available. It's running into a bit of a snag right now, but it's a long story. I won't get into it, but it will be available on those venues as well.
Right. And you are also on Facebook, Twitter, which is now X, and Instagram.
Yes.
Yeah, it's Instagram and it's /Fisher Fran/. And Twitter, it's KILLRNEY Grace. And Facebook, it's www.facebook.com/Mary Fisher Author. So all of this we're going to put into the publication when this edition of this episode comes out as well. Thank you so much for sharing, Mary Frances. You have been a wonderful guest. Any last words you'd like to say with regards to how you see the world from your lens, your perspective?
I would say writing this book, I learned something that I never really understood. It's an expression that says the more you know. I'm sorry, how does it go? Oh, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't understand what that meant until I wrote this book. And that's when I realized the events that are happening today have already, in many respects, happened 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And that shocked me. I had never thought of it in those terms. But that was my big lesson for that. And probably the most fun for me in writing this book was to cast my aunts and uncles as little tiny kids, little tots, and to imagine what life was like and their little pranks that they told me about. When I was growing up, I included them, and they're just so sweet. But my mother's told me one very interesting fact. She said, you know, the things we got away with as kids, today, kids are arrested for.
Yeah.
And it hadn't occurred to me. I thought, oh, she's right. You know, back then they called them pranks, childish pranks.
Yeah.
And today you'd be hauled off to jail. It's like, oh my God. So
but it was fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
History has a way of repeating itself.
Yes, it does.
So the more things change, they remain the same. Wow. Amazing. Okay, so there you have it, folks. Mary Frances Fisher. She has been our special guest on this episode of Let's Just Read. And remember to check her information. You'll see it in the edited version of this episode of Let's Just Read. And we want to thank her so much for being on this program, on this episode, to share the insight on her writings with us and how she sees things happening in the world through her lens. Remember our watchwords: be enlightened by reading so that you can have the knowledge that you need to learn the things that are necessary to make life a whole lot better. Okay, so until next time, this is Andy of Andy's Personal Development on Let's Just Read, together with my guest, Mary Frances Fisher, saying so long, Godspeed, God bless.
Thank you.
Bye for now, folks.
Bye-bye. Thank you. And we're done. Yay. Go team.
Yeah, hold on a minute.
We're not done. I lied.
Okay, great.